everybody, to The Graded Escape. My name is Anna
And I'm Kelly Linden.
and we are here to start our very first podcast episode with you today called Meet Anna and Kelley. We want to welcome you to The Graded Escape. The purpose of our podcast is to inform about our own homeschooling experiences while also sharing our knowledge as former teachers with you. We are here to support, encourage, and connect with parents who are doing education differently.
Yeah, and as Anna said, today is our very first episode, and we're just really excited to be here and get started with all of you.
Yeah, we have a lot of content that we want to share. And so we thought that we would take some time this first episode just to introduce ourselves, let you get to know us a little bit. That way you have background going into our future episodes. So to start, I want to introduce Kelley. And she's going to start off by telling you a little bit about yourself and how about your qualifications, your experience as a teacher, and sort of what's brought you up to this point.
Yeah. So thank you, Anna. I got my bachelor's degree in special education and elementary education from Rhode Island College many years ago. And then I got my master's degree in special education from Purdue University. I started off as a special education teacher in an out-of-district placement for kids with pretty significant social, emotional, and behavioral challenges in Providence, Rhode Island. Then I transitioned to Fall River, Massachusetts, where I spent a decent amount of time there as a special education teacher, both in my own classroom, again, for kids with social, emotional challenges, and then just as a generic special education teacher. I then had my kids and paused teaching. I think my plan was to always go back, and then things changed pretty significantly, and I took a different path with being home with the kids. I then went to Northeastern University and got my postgraduate certificate in applied behavior analysis. And I am now a board certified behavior analyst, which caveat, none of the things in this podcast are covered under my BCBA certification. Just need to put that out there. So how about you, Anna? What's your background?
Yeah, so I got my undergraduate degree in women's studies and psychology, actually, from the University of Rhode Island. And I had no idea that I wanted to go into education. I thought that I was going to go into, counseling work or something like that. And I ended up having some really interesting positions before I had some time off, and I spent that subbing just to sort of make ends meet. I got back into the classroom. My mom, being a former teacher, sort of paved the way for me to get into the private school that she was teaching at that I went to prior as a child. And so I was in the classroom for the first time as a sub, and really loved it. I loved working with kids. I loved working with lesson plans, and all of a sudden it sort of felt like this might be a niche for me. And the same school that I was subbing at was doing a master's program in education, or getting your master's in teaching. And that was through Roger Williams University. And I kind of fell into it. I was sort of encouraged to apply to it. Other teachers had seen me in the classroom and thought that I was a natural, which was, a really nice compliment. And so I applied for it, I got it, and I ended up doing that year to get my master's in teaching. And I did more subbing after that because at the time, I think that both of you and I got into the field, teaching was, it was very hard to get a teaching job. I subbed at all different types of schools, private, public, parochial, non-denominational, whatever. And I think I knew from the beginning that I was probably going to fit best into the private school setting, just from my background, having gone to private schools primarily, and just the way that they run. I think that was more of, I knew I was going to be more comfortable in a private school setting. So I ended up getting a position as a third grade teacher, and that was where I did the bulk of my time. And then when COVID hit, and I had kids, that all I had kids, and then COVID hit. So I ended up stepping away from that position and thinking that I was going to be home actually for a while at that point. But I ended up kind of getting pulled into an early childhood position at another private school. And then that landed me in first grade eventually. So I've done kind of a plethora of grades. I've also done some higher level grades, fourth and fifth grade when it comes to ELA, reading and writing. And so, having a background in specializing in reading and having, certification in curriculum design and development is, sort of my my area of expertise and what I really love to do. But I love my time in the classroom, but I was glad to start this next chapter of homeschooling. So that gives a little bit of professional background for the two of us. But how did you go from, so you were in the classroom and then you decided to do the behavioral analyst route. And what made you decide to, you had kids. So what made you decide to then not put them in school and start the homeschooling idea?
Yeah. So again, I have, I guess I'll start off by saying I have 7-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, Owen and Grace. And when I found out I was pregnant and just trying to manage life as a new family, it was very, very expensive, as we know, to put one child in daycare, never mind 2 infants in daycare. So it just made sense financially for me to stay home, watch the kids, take a breath. So then I had always been really interested, obviously, in sharing about my background. A lot of it was kids with social emotional behavioral. I've always been fascinated by behavior, science of behavior. So it was always a goal of mine once I got my master's to then go back and become a BCBA. So while I was home, I sort of simultaneously went back to school, did that, and then started working for a small company doing ABA therapy to do my hours and sat for the exam and all that kind of stuff. However, all of that time, I was still thinking, yes, I'll put my kids in public school. That's something that I experienced, having been a former public school teacher, knowing how vested teachers are. I really didn't have any doubts that was the direction we were going. So I put my kids in preschool, pre-K 3. And that experience, I think, started to open my eyes just a little bit. I remember the first parent-teacher conference that we had, I was told that my son, Owen, who again was 3 at the time, and this was his very first school experience, that he was a lot. And I wanted more information about that. What does that mean? And so that left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And then
I think it's hard. Sorry, not to interrupt. I think it's hard. Okay. I think it's hard too when like you hear that kind of a term as a teacher. Like when you hear a kid is a lot, you're sort of thinking like, okay, well, when a teacher says that, it's kind of like when a teacher says that your kid is like overly social or something like that. There's always
like a hidden meaning.
Yeah, there can be sometimes a hidden meaning in that, and I think we pick up on that differently being teachers and maybe having said the same types of things in or like when you read a report and you read something about a child, you're like, okay, that's what the teacher wrote. This is kind of what it means. And so I would have taken the same thing, like hearing my child was a lot. I kind of would have been like, you really need to unpack that for me because.
And that's what I had said.
Yeah, that's super generic.
I need you to tell me more.
Yeah, like lots more. What does that mean?
So it wasn't enough to really decide to homeschool right then and there. Then they went to pre-K 4 and it was fine. They had a lovely preschool teacher there. I didn't have any big issues with the school that they were at. And then once they were in school, it was only half day preschool, but there started to be, I started to take notice more and more of reports of, unsafe things happening at school. And how do I explain to my kids as they get older that school is not a safe place to be? So safety was one of the big reasons why I decided to try the homeschooling route. Not only physical safety, but also mental safety. What are they exposed to? What's happening with other kids? I'm very type A, so I definitely wanted more control over what my kids were exposed to, what they had access to, and just having knowledge about what they were doing every day. That was so hard. Even with half day preschool, I went from knowing who they were with, what they were doing, even working part-time. I had my husband, I had my mom, I knew what they were doing. So it was hard to just drop them off at school. Bye, see you in 2.5 hours. What'd you do at school today? And they were 3 and 4. So you get like dribs and drabs and stuff doesn't really make sense. And then it kind of all comes together. But that was really hard for me. So I think selfishly, I also wanted a little bit more control over what was going on. And so that was kind of how we sort of got into it. I also have a lovely friend, Danielle, who homeschools. I became close with her, and just hearing about her experiences and how she does it. And I thought, well, like she's doing it. Like, why can't we do it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how we got into it. It was never my intention, but really enjoying it, and I think it's really working for us right now. So how about you? How did you land on the homeschooling journey?
It's funny. So I just thinking about that last piece, I also had a woman that I sort of was influenced a little bit by. It's funny how sometimes when you meet someone that's doing it, you're sort of like, oh my gosh, this is really something that people do. Like, it was in my mind, but then when you actually are talking with another mom that homeschools and you're hearing it, you're like, oh, this really happens. Because that was kind of a changing point for me too.
Right.
So I planned to send my kids to school. The school that I was working at the end there was, a great private school that I had started my son Leo at. So I have two children. I have Leo, who is 7, and my son Owen, who's almost 5. And so Leo is funny. When we started, I was actually in the nursery teaching position. So Leo had me for nursery. We were in the same class together, which is, tough when you've got your own kid in the class. There's pros and cons. But then I was, I moved up to first grade. And so he was going to preschool. And again, I knew the school. I was teaching at the same school. I mean, talk about being there with your kid.
Right.
But yet I was very separate. He had lovely teachers. It wasn't, anything like that. I did see a real change in Leo's behavior as soon as he started like actual school, in the classroom with other kids. There was a real shyness that took over that we ended up finding out later was selective mutism that really took hold of Leo at a very young age that we hadn't seen prior to putting him in school, and come to find out that actually is usually the catalyst for a lot of kids entering the school platform, can be a real launching point for that selective mutism to kick in. And so he was existing in the school day. I'm sure he had moments where he was, happy, but there was a real anxiety that took over him throughout the day. He wasn't able to take part in certain things the way he wanted to, because he wasn't communicating with many people. He had a friend that he shared with. He did start to whisper talk to his teachers, but there was an element that was a real struggle. And for, a lot of kids at the beginning of the school year, it's always hard to separate from parents for the most part. I mean, sometimes you get those kids that trot in and they're just happy to go. And it's like, okay, cool.
Mine were. Right. I thought there would be tears. Yeah. They were okay.
Some kids, you see that and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Whereas others, it's a tough separation. And I expected that to be the case with Leo, but normally as the year goes on, those separations become easier. And that wasn't happening. I mean, it was everything. I had a baby at home. I had my sister who was watching. My husband works funny hours as a nurse. And then I'm bringing this kid to school every day who's struggling to get into the car, and then I'm dropping him off. There's tears. I'm running down the hallway to my first grade classroom, trying to then meet my group. I mean, I was just like, I was existing. And I could tell, was Leo having a fine experience? I would say yes, but I mean, for what he was able to take part in with it, yes, he was, having a fine experience, but that wasn't good enough for me. And I knew that there was so much more that Leo would have wanted to do or be a part of, but in that environment with the selective he couldn't. And I just, and that grated on me. It was like, there's got to be a different way for this to work. And, I wasn't being the teacher that I, wanted to be. I wasn't able to put the time and effort into it. And I'm also a type A person. And I knew how I was as a teacher before children. And I always felt like that was a struggle once I had kids, to sort of, devote my time. And we can do a whole episode on that at some point. But, I just, the feeling was off. It was like, we couldn't have been in a better situation, at this great school. I'm working there with him. I mean, like,
on paper, it sounds great.
It seemed like this couldn't have been any better. And then, on paper, it really was the perfect setup, but the feeling was off. And so I remember I had a TA that was volunteer. No, she'd been hired. She wasn't a volunteer, but she had spent some time with me in my classroom. She, worked with different first grades and kind of where they needed her. And I found out that she actually had homeschooled her daughter from first grade, and her daughter at the time was in one of her last years of high school or something, still being homeschooled. And she was a former educator. And I was just like, she walked in the room and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to pick your brain. And the more she came into my classroom at like, I don't know, an indoor recess time or a time when I could like talk with her, I was always like, she came there to give me a break, and I like didn't want to leave the room. So I wanted to talk to her about homeschooling. And I think it was that relationship and asking her questions and finding out about like, wait, so this really happens? How did you do this? I just got like enamored with the idea. And I thought this isn't working. There has to be another way. Maybe this homeschooling is the way. And so, I remember she had told me about the co-op or the organization in the state that we're in, Rhode Island. She told me about Enrich. And so thankfully, we're lucky enough that the state we're in hosts different informational sessions for homeschoolers. And so I looked up the next one. I got my paper and pencil and I went to it and I took notes. I wanted to hear all about how it works from, their perspective as that big organization. And I'm looking around other families, I'm hearing other people talk, I'm meeting other people, and I'm just like, wow, this really exists. This is a real thing. And I was like, this really might be the answer to a lot of what I was looking for. And so that I had it kind of set in my head. And then, other issues arose for me personally. But was there anything once you had made that decision that you thought homeschooling was going to be the route, like changes you had to make in your life that, whether it was working related, was your husband on board? Were there any other kind of specific things you had to think about in that decision? Because I think I even posted, I remember myself when I was so close to just like really trying to be like, okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to quit my job. Posting like on Facebook to some homeschooling groups being like, what was the final thing? Like, what was the last straw that you were like, yep, this is what I'm doing? Like, what made you just jump over that hump? Because it was like, I was looking for some magical answer to be like, okay, well, if you can answer this the right way, then you're ready to go. Right. Which I couldn't find. Right. Which doesn't exist. And there isn't like one thing. We would love to be able to give you an answer if you're considering homeschooling. Hey, if this happens, you should definitely homeschool. But it is very personal. It is very nuanced. And sometimes it's just a feeling, right? Sometimes it's just like, something's not working. I'm unhappy. And, you have every right to be happy with the education that your child is receiving. And if you're not happy with, if you're truly unhappy, I should say, because there are probably moments where you might not be totally thrilled, but if you're truly unhappy and if they're unhappy, then that might be a good indicator that something needs to change. So as far as considerations, I did have to talk with my husband, obviously, about it. I think the biggest consideration for me was, as I had shared, I just had gone back to school. I had just become board certified. I was ready to start on this new career path. And I had worked so hard to get there that I didn't want to just quit my job. I really love what I do. And I had worked so hard to get there that I wasn't willing to make that sacrifice and trying to figure out, okay, well, can I make this work while also working part-time? And thankfully, the company that I work for is very, very flexible, very, very understanding. I can make my own hours. So I typically work more of like a second shift schedule. So we do some schooling in the morning and then I go to work. I'm able to rely on my husband for some childcare because, of his work schedule and being able to work from home and things like that. So that was probably the biggest consideration for me was I don't want to quit my job. So how can I make this work within the confines of what we have? So how about you? Considerations that you had to make? So I think I had pretty much, I knew what we were doing was not working. So it was like, what are our other options? Are we gonna, and I kind of had a similar thing as far as like getting the position that I had at this particular school was a school that I thought that once I had it, I was like, oh, this is it. I'm going to be here the rest of my teaching career.
You've worked so hard.
I worked hard for it, and I was good at it. I know I was a good teacher and, but I also know that I wasn't up to my standard of teaching the last few years I was doing it because I was just so torn in different directions. But, I brought it up to my husband who kind of a thing was like what homeschool, what? Like that was really a very no idea. But he's definitely someone that likes to do his own research and look into things. And so as soon as he started to sort of dive into it, the more he was on board with it. Our biggest hang up was financial. We depended on both of our incomes to make things work. And so it was sort of like, can we take this leap of what sacrifices can we make if, so that we can do this on one income? Because I couldn't be a full-time, I couldn't do teaching part-time. That wasn't going to be a possibility for us. And it was either like I had to quit and do this or, we can't do this. It was kind of a,
all or nothing. Which I feel like is pretty common for a lot of families.
Yeah, especially with the little one, like if they're little. I mean, at the time I had like a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I mean, so it was just, that was a big decision. And I think we got to a point where we kind of were just like, well, we're just going to jump off this cliff and just take a leap of faith that this is going to work out, which is easier said than done. But we were that's how kind of unhappy we were, or how much things were not working with what we were currently doing. It was just so evident. It was like, why would we continue down this way where everybody's not thriving? Nobody's really, everything is just off. So it was like, we got to try something else. Even if it fails, we got to try it. So,
well, and I think that's the key too, is just try it, right? Because I got very hung up on, okay, well, what will this look like though once they're in middle school, or how am I going to homeschool in high school? And at that time, my kids were in kindergarten. Like, what?
I know.
But that's just I think the way my mind works is always thinking ahead. So I did. And again, talking with Danielle, she had said like, well, every year we reevaluate and we still think like, is this working? Is this what our kids are happy with? Asking them, would you like to go to school? Would you, do you want to keep doing this? To get their feedback as well. So just if you're on the fence and you're thinking about it, just know that it doesn't have to be a forever decision, right? Like you can try it and see how it goes. And then you reevaluate. But I think that's the biggest thing is that once you do it, it doesn't mean that you can't go back. Right.
Nothing's set in stone. And so I think that was the biggest catalyst. And now my husband's probably one of the biggest supporters of homeschooled education that I've ever met. I mean, he thinks that it's just the most wonderful thing. So it's kind of funny how, but he knew nothing about it prior. I knew nothing about it, even being in an education field. It wasn't like homeschooling was one of the facets we were taught about. It's like you're taught about the differences between private and public and Montessori and all these, your classroom structures and yada, yada. Homeschool is just a completely outlier. Like you're never, taught about that's even, that's just really not even, it's just not really addressed. And so it really was a lot of deep diving into figuring out what homeschooling was myself. So once we've made the decision to homeschool, which we've sort of gotten up to that point, we could say, what happened or what did you do prior to, like you made the decision to homeschool. Was there any things that helped you at the very beginning? Like you either pulled them out of school or you just didn't re-enlist the next year, like those practical steps, anything that you had to do prior to starting with them, I guess.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you went to like the Enrich,
informational session.
Thing. I didn't. No. I just was like, okay, I'll look it up, see what I need to do. I think I maybe asked Danielle. The thing about kindergarten is that, in our state, school is not compulsory until age 6. So my kids at that time didn't even really need to be enrolled. They were already, the thing about my kids, they were already registered in our district because they went to preschool. So there was a spot for them in kindergarten. And I needed to inform the district, the district and then the principal of the next school that, hey, I'm withdrawing, Owen and Grace, we're going to handle our education privately. Super easy. But just a standard form that I had to, or letter that I had to type up, send to them, and then it went to the school committee for approval, which I know in our state it does because of, the financial implications for the actual school district and the budget and all of that kind of stuff. So it does need to be approved by the school committee. And then once we got our letter, we were able to just kind of move on with it. So it was pretty simple. I think dropping the form off at the admin rather than sticking it in the mail because it's right down the street from us. So I just went and dropped it off. That was like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm putting it in the mailbox. And it felt okay. This is official. So there are some steps, and I think it does vary depending on whatever state you're in. So,
and we have a great link for you that we're putting down here to a website that can show you sort of the state by state breakdown of what you need to do as far as steps. That we should know that is ever changing, however, because states are currently, homeschooling is blowing up across the country, I'd say. And did you hear that in the news there was a thing about, I think in Florida, over the past 5 years, there's been a 46% increase in homeschooling over the past 5 years. It's crazy.
I believe it. Yeah.
So policies are changing, rules, sometimes states are getting more strict, some are getting more lenient. So, you definitely have to keep an eye on what your state is up to, but this website is a great one to go and look and see just generally what steps you have to take.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we had to do, at our state, the letter of intent that you send at the beginning of the year to homeschool that gets approved. And then at the end of the year, you send a very simple letter of completion, and then the letter of intent again. And so it's a pretty, we're not subject to state testing. I don't believe in our state, or sending like portfolios or curriculum overviews to our school districts. We have it pretty, depending on the district you're in our state, it's pretty lenient, I say, compared to some other states that have more rigid rules or whatnot. But yeah, I would suggest looking at your the website for your state's policies. I think it's wonderful how like you had that friend Danielle to go to. I had that woman that I knew through school, but wasn't really a friend. And so I ended up I went to the library and I searched like homeschooling books, not like I didn't want like curriculum books. I wanted examples of families that had homeschooled. And I found a few really great ones. And those we've listed in the show notes for you if you want to look at some of those books. But they were like the stories written by the parents who had taken their kids out, had 5 kids, how they homeschooled, how that even looked. And so it was fun to read examples of people's stories and journeys in the homeschool process, and then hearing about what their kids did. Now, for me, that was very helpful. I really liked diving into to books. So I read like 3 or 4 books that were sort of family narratives about how it worked for them and what they did and struggles they had and, moments of joy that they had. And it was very, it gave it a real context for me as like how families do this. Right. That actually, I found to be helpful.
Yeah. So actually while you were talking about that, I did, when you were talking about what did you do before? So they ended pre-K 4 and I was thinking about homeschooling, but I didn't send my letter of intent, I think until like August maybe. And what I did was I told myself, I'm going to take the summer and just do a little bit of like trial lessons at home and see how the kids respond. Let's see if we can even make this work. If they are like on board with it, totally reluctant, somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Can I make this work balancing school and working? So there was a little bit of trial and error that I had done during like the summer vacation that was very helpful.
Yeah. Because that's the thing too. It's interesting, depending on if your child is so little that they've never actually been in formal schooling and you're just starting this. Like, for example, Owen, he's never stepped foot, except for being in my own classroom when I was like decorating it or whatever. Right. Like he's never been in any school setting like that where he's been a student and he's had a teacher. And so he doesn't have any frame of reference, whereas Leo does. And so I kind of remember the same thing when we were starting sort of that kindergarten year, when I was doing like little activities with him and things. There was a lot of reference back to, because he had that memory. And so sometimes we were doing something, I don't know, outside, and like I was like, oh yeah, that was our reading or whatever. And he was like, oh, but we have to sit, like, don't we have to sit at the table for reading or something like that? He already had it, which I remember thinking was really surprising, because again, knowing the school he was at and the structure of that preschool space, which was lovely, like how he already had it in his mind that like schooling took place, like learning took place inside at a table with like, I don't know, he had a very narrow scope from such a young age. I just was floored that was, so I had to kind of backtrack and be like, nope, that's not how, we do it at that doesn't have to be how learning is. And so if you're pulling a kid out from, that's had experience in the school, it might be that idea of sort of playing around with doing some, activities together to get a sense of how they're going to be, is definitely interesting, because it's different, if your kid's never been in school or they've been in school a bit. So,
definitely.
So, to sort of wrap up what we, our introduction to you all, I think it'd be fun to sort of share, fears and hopes that you have for either your kids or yourselves, your homeschooling journey. We've both been doing it now for a few years. I mean, but we're not experts on it, and we haven't gone through some of the, upper elementary, middle school, high school years yet. Although, as you'll hear later, we're hoping to have some homeschooling parents who have tackled those years on, whose kids are now either in college or working. So thinking about why don't we do some of your fears first? Are there still lingering fears you have about the decision you made, or, just that voice in your head that drives you crazy?
Yeah.
I have one of those.
For sure. So it's interesting because I think where I'm at right now, as we're filming this episode, a new fear has kind of cropped up that I hadn't had before. because it was so new, it was fresh, we were really motivated. It's kind of like, well, what if I'm not, like, what if I start slipping in my motivation in terms of getting our lessons done or our schoolwork done?
I have the same.
Just like, what if I wake up and the house is dirty and there's laundry to be folded and I'm just really tired and I have a treatment plan due or something like that. Well, we'll just skip school today. And then it starts to snowball. So right now it's the summer. So we've been doing some school, probably not as much as I would have liked. I'm hoping that we're able to get back on track here in the fall. That's my plan. But it definitely is a fear that I have of, well, we have a doctor's appointment scheduled for that morning. Because of my schedule, our mornings are really when we're doing, like I said, a lot of our school.
Yeah, same.
And so if we miss a morning, we can't just make it up in the afternoon because I have to go to work. So I think maybe it's on me to either be a little bit more creative or a little bit more maybe harder on myself for no, we do actually have to get this done. Even if we have a doctor's appointment, if it ends at 10 and we've got an hour before we should do something. Right. I think I'm so used to, we get up, we have breakfast, brush our teeth, and then we go down and we do school. And if that gets messed up, then, well, we should just not do school. Right. And I think I need to loosen up the reins a little bit in our sort of routine, that it's okay if it gets a little bit messed up, we can still go down and maybe do our reading lesson or just do a science. We did that the other day, which actually was nice. We had to finish up a science experiment. And usually it's at the end that we do science. And I was like, we just need to finish this. And they're like, oh, well, we don't have to do reading. We don't have to do math. And I was like, no, we're just going to do our science experiment because that was what we had time for. And that was what needed to be done. And it worked out fine. So I think that's one of my fears. Yeah. Just like not being super motivated and then also maybe being a little too tied to our routine and like letting that go. That's one of my fears. I have more, but go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to chime in just because I think that's actually a fear, like current fears is probably something that we'll revisit throughout the podcast because you're right. It changes depending on, like as you were talking about that fear, that is such a similar fear that I'm having right now or issue I'm struggling with, but it wasn't, last year this time. Right. And, at the beginning of all of this, right, the motivation and excitement of it all was really fresh and new. And then we got into this, okay, now we're into rhythms and routines. And now I've got my littlest one, Owen, who's kind of doing kindergarten work. So I'm juggling the two and making that work. And I'm finding that same type of thing. It's sort of like, well, if yesterday was a really hard day, maybe we'll just take tomorrow off because I'm thinking about like myself or right. If we don't get things done in the morning, afternoons tend to be a lot harder for my kiddos to focus and sit. Right, so I'm like, well, we got this going on. We're just not going to do it. And I get tied to that same sort of thing. Like it's our routine. If it doesn't happen on our routine, then we're just not going to do it. And I think sometimes when I'm like, well, how did you get up and out? And every day, like you were doing this in the classroom and it was like, okay, well, slightly different because it's your job. And so then I try to tell myself that sometimes I was like, look at this, like your job. If this was a job you were going to and somebody was paying you to do this, like you don't just not do it because you have 5 other house, keeping things to do. And so then I try to think like that. But it ebbs and flows because then I get, feedback from my husband at times. He'll be like, yeah, but you homeschool. So isn't that great that you can just, if it doesn't work today, you can just do it. I'm like, yes,
yeah, but I don't want it to snowball. Right. And I think some of that is like personality.
It is because, you have a plan and it's like, yes, you're right. Technically, did we have a meltdown this morning? So am I going to force reading to happen? Probably not. And that is the beauty of homeschooling. But how many of those, things can happen in a row before you start feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm dropping the ball. And I think that's definitely where I'm at as well. And coming off of the summer, I think we took more of a break than I anticipated. A lot of homeschooling families don't really take a break in the summer because, their days just are very different. And our homeschooling work is probably actual instructional work is like an hour. So, it's not like it's taking up 8 hours of the day. And so but we did stop a bit in the summer and kind of restarted. And, so I definitely have that same, like, what if I drop the ball because you are the one in charge, and our next episode, in fact, is all about myths and myths about homeschooling. And I know one of the biggest ones about parents thinking they can't do it, even though we'll address that myth in the next episode. But that doesn't mean it's not a fear, even as an educator, that, if you're dropping the ball, you've got a lot of other things on your plate. And, if you have another job or you just have other stressors, and yeah, that's a fear that I am also experiencing right now.
Well, and I think too, in another episode, we'll talk about types of homeschooling, and maybe for me, it's also like letting go of a little bit of the expectation. My kids are very avid readers, and so they're picking up books and they're reading constantly in the car, just in the morning before bed. They're consuming literature. Some of it's not the best literature, but it's literature. They're reading, they're accessing. So that is should be enough, right? To like quell this fear of, well, they're reading. So they actually read today, and that should be enough for your reading time or whatever. But I think one of the downsides to being a former educator is that you get very stuck in this, okay, but no direct instruction happened today, so no learning took place. And that's something that I also really have to let go of.
Oh, 100%, 100%, because that is right. I don't think that as a former educator, right, you're not taking in like every experience as a learning experience, or every, like they are learning constantly as little kids, sponges absorbing things, right? You think about, well, learning happened because, this direct instruction happened, and then they did this activity afterwards, and then there was this assessment to show what they've learned, and then that's our take on what learning looks like. And so and we definitely have that probably more ingrained than the average homeschooling mom that isn't a former educator, because that is what we're trained to think learning looks like. And so I've definitely come far from that, but I return to it sometimes, especially if we've had a week where a lot of learning happened, but I might have only sat and done direct instruction lesson with Leo, twice or something. I think, oh gosh, but was it really was that enough? Or I compare to what I did, would he get that in the classroom? And then that just spirals into a whole other fun, worry monster that pops into my head about, my fears. But
I think too, for me, like going along with that is when we'll debunk this myth in the next one too about socialization. But if friends are available to hang out with, if you guys are around, or Danielle or other friends, and it just happens to be something that came up, we'll prioritize that for different reasons. But then we maybe don't get our lessons done because so then it's like, well, should we have stayed home and done our lessons and not hung out with friends? And it's like, well, they are sort of sick of each other, so it'd be nice if they had some other. So it's definitely like constantly going back and forth, and even having all of the experience that we both do, and all the knowledge in curriculum and in instruction and assessment, how kids learn, development, all of that. We still have fears. We still are worried. We're probably the most competent people ever to teach our kids, but there's still those fears.
No, that's true. And we do that with the social piece too, because as a homeschooler, you do have to be intentional about your social times, which is wonderful. And there's such great, things that come from that, which we address later on. But that's part of what you have to plan into your week. And so when you're thinking about, lessons and friends happen to be available. And that's why I think some homeschoolers really rely on things like their co-ops, because they have their weekly meetup. And so they know that that's going to be, the time, or maybe you have like a standing science group that meets on a, Thursday morning. So, they're going to be with friends then doing something or whatever, or even a standing play date or playground meetup, because you're right. Other times it's like, well, these friends they love are available. We were going to do this activity this morning for reading, but they want to see friends and I want them to see friends. So we're going to slip that slide.
I need to see friends.
I need to see friends. Yeah. And so you kind of, you make your choice based off of that. All right. So it is funny how we're talking about fears and how they've changed, because mine have every month or so, I feel like it's a different fear, but up until this point, I think similar fears that I've had that have since, either, I've squelched it or it's appeared in a different way. But, one of those, I never had that big fear of socialization, which is a huge myth, and we will talk about it. But I think for me, I had a fear with, especially Leo having the selective mutism, that making friends and being social, I had that idea of like, well, in the classroom, he's kind of forced to be because, am I hindering his progress with it because I'm allowing him to be home and I'm allowing those social interactions to happen less frequently. I didn't realize it took just time to see that actually fewer social interactions, but more planned and monitored, and it was actually better for him, and that he was able the quality over the quantity of it. So he was actually having play dates throughout the week that lasted 2 hours or so was perfect for him because he was much more confident. He'd come out of his shell. He could do it for 2 hours and really, push himself. And then he would need that time to be quiet and be kind of rest from it. Like that was enough. And so I actually saw a major change in him once we did start homeschooling. So it was like I had that fear initially that I was like, oh gosh, is this gonna hinder his progress? And the absolute opposite happened. So that was a really neat thing to see happen, and the way that he's become who he is now. And I think I don't know what would have happened had he stayed in the classroom. Would he have turned a corner and started to talk more and be more vocal? Maybe not. I mean, from what I've, the research I've done on selective mutism and what a lot of kids, it tends to go one way or the other, get better or get worse. And every kid is different. And I don't know. I think he always would have been a quiet kid in school. And I always think that he would have been one that would have wanted to share his opinion, but probably couldn't have, would have been in the background. And I love that feature about the homeschooling makeup, that he's so confident and comfortable sharing what he wants to share when he wants to share it, because it's it's us. And even in small group settings, when we're working with friends doing something in like a science group or whatever, he's sharing, he's commenting, he's whatever. So that was definitely for me an area, just because of personalities. Like some kids are so adaptable and they, outgoing and whatnot, that, that may not be a fear because, throw them on the playground, they're going to make friends, they're going to whatever. And honestly, that's how Leo kind of is now. But at the beginning, I was nervous about that for sure. The financial piece was probably one of the biggest fears to start, and is obviously an ongoing struggle because financial stuff is always tricky. But I didn't have some of the fears that I know a lot of parents have, probably just being a former educator, about, can I do it? Can I teach? Because, we know we can.
Right.
But I did start to develop a fear of like, well, can I do this as a homeschooler though? Because it is so different. And I know we'll talk more about that later on, but, I'm teaching to my own kids. It's a completely different structure, a completely different setup. It's a completely different way of doing it. And, is my teaching background actually going to hinder me in my ability? Like, was I just too made for the classroom that that's how I need to be? And that's just what I need to do. Or can I actually rewire my own brain into thinking about learning differently and do this with my own kids? And all of those fears have sort of, worked their way out through doing it. So I'm thankful that as many fears as I had to start, and the ones that do continue to arise, we do work through and find the best method for it. But they're very, whether you have a teaching background or not, I mean, the fears of homeschooling your kids and doing it right, or doing it well enough, or giving them everything they need, or that's going to be, I think, a constant thing.
As a parent, you're always worried, right? So this is just kind of another fear to sort of have that,
because now you're the one who's doing everything, really.
So I think, if I can just weigh in a little bit on the social piece, that was a little bit of a fear of mine with my daughter than with my son. So my son is very outgoing. He's one of those kids that he'll show up to the playground, and within 5 to 6, if there are other kids there that are not, toddlers, he's joined in and done something and made, a friend. We went to one playground a couple weeks ago, and he came up to get some water. He was like, I made a friend. She's from France. It's just like, what even? Like, who are you? Which is great. And then in my daughter, I see a little bit more of myself in, where I was very, very shy as a child in school, had trouble making friends, had trouble maintaining friends, and worrying about who's going to be my friend, who am I going to sit with. And I think I unnecessarily have those fears about her, or had those fears about her, because she's good at hanging. She's not as, extroverted as my son, but she does have her friends, and she's also okay just kind of playing by herself and doing her own thing. And I think some of that is good for her to you show up to the playground, your brother's playing, he's got his friend, you can join in there, or maybe you go and you look for someone else to try to make a friend that way, and it sort of pushes her to go out of her shell. She's not so anxious that she's worrying about it, she's talking about it. It's just something that I kind of notice. I'm sure if you asked her, she would have no idea what I'm talking about. So that's good.
Well, I think with your background with the behavioral analysis too, like you're probably, I mean, not only was that something that you were, watching being in special ed at schools too, but you probably have a different take on, I don't think there's enough emphasis sometimes put on, the pressures on kids from a very little age, being, away from parents, being in a classroom space, being, with peers that are kind of molding a lot of their, values and morals and ideas about things. And just being some kids, it doesn't appear to make a huge difference. They're able to put on either a front for it, or there's ones that really can't, and you can see it like visually that they're struggling. But I think regardless of what kind of kid you have, there's in that setting, that there is that pressure to fit in or conform, or am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? I mean, I remember one of the things that Leo had said about even in preschool, one reason, and it was one of the reasons he didn't always want to talk, was he said, I'm afraid I'll talk at the wrong time and then get in trouble. And I was like, well, how harsh is the punishment if you get, but he didn't want to ever be singled out. And that was me as a kid too. I was very quiet. If I look back on report cards, I had comments all the time, like, I wish you would share more, speak more. I didn't have the selective mutism. I mean, I would talk to when I was, asked something or whatever, but I was definitely quiet. And so they're sort of living with that layer of weight, I think a lot of kids on them. I think all kids, whether some are able to handle it more than others, but, and girls, I think it's a definite, I think there's like 10 layers on girls. Or it hits earlier, this this pressure or this, they're very observant and, very able to, or sensitive sometimes in a different way. Kids, I mean, boys are too. Leo was definitely a very sensitive kid and very observant. But I think that pressure on kids in the classroom, and that was one of my fears and one of my, I guess, and ultimate hopes, is that having taken him out of that when we are doing work, he's able to learn it without the conflict, without that pressure. And, I don't know if you would see, I mean, I can remember working with smaller groups of kids when I would take out a certain outlier, or I would have I would mix the groups in a certain way, and somebody wasn't part of it, or somebody, wasn't even in the room because I did small groups in a different space, or I don't know, there was just, when you alter the setting, sometimes you can see if you've alleviated some of that pressure off of kids, the social piece or some, their learning can flourish in a very different way. And so my hope with homeschooling is that I'm doing that for my kids, because a fear I had of keeping them in that space was that was going to overtake the learning,
there's so much anxiety around and I experienced that and not to, keep beating a dead horse, but like I experienced that as a child.
So did I.
I'm really anxious about who I'm going to sit next to at lunch, or my friend's not here today. Who am I going to play with at recess? This is my only friend. Now I have to somehow ask these other girls to play. And it was always a fear, always a constant fear. And I did fine in school. I always, did well, but it was a huge weight on my shoulders all the time.
I always wonder if I hadn't, because same thing. If I always wonder, had I not, if I had been homeschooled, would I have, excelled in a different way? Because I was very subject to those pressures and developed a ton of anxiety as a young kid. And so, it's just an interesting, that's just an interesting piece to go off of. I didn't, and I'm backtracking here, but I forgot to mention too, that with one of my decisions to stay at home and homeschool was also somewhat attributed to the fact that my boys have Marfan syndrome. And so a big hindrance for them, they have a lot of vision issues. And so I was very concerned with their ability to be adequately serviced in the classroom with those vision issues. And I know, again, at the school that I was at, that they would have done everything they could have, having him sit close and giving him copies of things to look at. But there's still a level of, and my husband who has Marfan's and would tell me his school experience, which was left lots to be desired. The kind of access that he was given as somebody with vision issues, he's like, I didn't learn a lot of stuff as fast as I could have because I was constantly, struggling to see things or to, and he said I always was uncomfortable because while they thought they were doing the right thing by putting me close to the board, I was also always on display. I was always the one closest, or I always had to sit, and that made me be on show all the time. And so technically, could I see better if I was close to the board? Yes, I could. But was I paying any attention? No, because I felt like I was being watched. So he's like, it hindered my learning in that way. And so I remember there was a lot, like hearing him talk about his experience too. And I was like, gosh, I don't want that for them. And I don't know if that's what would have happened, but I have a feeling, especially, just having seen my first son go through, the short amount of time that he did, I do think that would have been, even though the school might have had the best of intentions, the teacher could have been as, amazing as they could. I know there's nothing that you can do. If a kid has to sit close to the board to see, you have to put them close to the board. Right, and if that means they're on show, it means they're on, at some point you have to. So I just, that was another, I think, weighed in on the decision to homeschool, but, and added to that fear of, gosh, what would his learning have looked like had he been in the classroom with those vision issues, as well. So, yeah.
Okay. So that's fine. Yeah. All right. So now we'll get into hopes. So we'll be a little more positive here.
Yes. Fears are encroaching and are ever changing. And I think
for sure we could talk about fears and anxiety all day, but that's really a separate episode, a different podcast altogether. Yeah. So what are some of your hopes? I know you mentioned that you wanted Leo to, develop some friendships, be more confident socially. What are some other hopes that you have for your homeschooling journey?
So I'd say my biggest hope for when I switched to homeschooling was I was hoping for a much more cohesive, like loving family structure, to be honest, because I felt like the getting up and out and not seeing each other all day, I didn't like that. Yeah. It didn't feel right to me, even if Leo had gone off to school, skipping and singing and jumping, with happiness. It might have made some things easier, but still the getting up and being separate, just working to maintain the lifestyle, but not be a part of my kid's day. I struggled with that with Leo. Same thing that you had mentioned, like not knowing what his day was like, and just being gone from them for so long. And I hadn't even experienced that with Owen yet, but I struggled with it a lot. And so my hope of taking us out of that element was to strengthen kind of our family unit, because we would be able to spend a lot more time together. Mm-hmm. They'd be able to have access to their dad in a different way because he works funny hours. So being home, like if it happens to be a morning he's home, I can shift things around so they can spend quality time with their dad. Whereas if they were at school 8 hours a day, there'd be a lot of days of the week they wouldn't see him at all. Right. So I was thinking about that and sort of ways to sort of grow and as a family. And that was one of my biggest hopes, was for us as a family unit to work together. And I wanted that for us. And I think I wanted genuine friendships for my kids. I think I struggled with friendships in school my whole time through. I think I saw friendships, or what friendships can look like in the classroom, and not that there aren't, great friendships that can occur, but for every one of those, I would probably see 10 of, social interactions that were really nasty, nasty or tough to handle. And I wanted to preserve my kids' innocence, their youth, their childhood for as long as possible. And that the friendships that they were building to be very authentic and genuine. And they were from a real, not from a place of, well, we're in the same class, so we're, kind of lumped together. I wanted it to be based off of something else. And I, a homeschool really, I think, has allotted for that. And ultimately my hope is that my kids who, love learning in a very different way. I know that's the goal of I think, that they're happy, that they are successful, and whether that looks like going to college or not, if they take a different, route, because again, with the homeschooling atmosphere, they have access to things differently because our time is so, free in a lot of ways. And so that they would have grow into a better sense of who they are based off of their experiences and their confidence in themselves, and all these things that I felt would happen more authentically if they were in a setting of a homeschool kind of nature, versus having a lot of that molded and sculpted in a school setting where you are putting a lot of faith and trust in the adults that are taking care of them. And yeah, I think having been on that other side, not to say that there aren't phenomenal educators out there, because there are, and we are absolutely not here to bash any teachers, because gosh, teachers work so hard, and there are so many incredible ones out there that I could name. But there are ones that you would, I don't know, or things that you've seen, or just kids that have fallen through cracks because of the system. It's the way the system is built. It's not a teacher's fault. It's not even sometimes a school's fault, but you've definitely seen things over the years that give you pause or question. And all I could see was like, gosh, if that was my kid, or if that was, and then once becoming a mom, those things just hit so differently. And really I just, so I think the whole hope in it is that I'm making the right choice for them, that their future is as bright as can be, I guess, ultimately, is by doing it this way. And and really having faith that that's what's going to happen, because you don't know. Right. Yeah. Hence where the fears creep in. Yeah. But so those are my overarching hopes, I would say. Yeah. What about you, for your family or your kids or yourself?
I think my biggest hope is very similar to yours, that just they're happy and that they continue to love learning and want to learn and see the value of just gaining information about anything that they're interested in, that they stay motivated to learn. I think one that I didn't mention earlier, one of my reasons for pulling my kids out was I have Owen, who is very, very curious. He talks a lot and he asks a lot of questions. And having been an educator in classrooms, and then even going in and doing some observations for work now, I've seen that curiosity punished. Raising your hand or speaking out when it's not your turn. Stop talking. We're not talking about that right now. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Now, this is sort of on the very dramatic end of things, but I have seen it. It does happen where,
and even when a teacher delivers it in the nicest way, it's still, and you can't even always fault the teacher, because it's the system problem. When you've got 20 something kids in your class, there's got to be a way to get that kid that won't stop asking questions that are lovely and wonderful. And I don't want to squelch your curiosity, but I can't let you just have a free for all.
So has nothing to do with the book that we're reading. We're reading, if you give a mouse a cookie, we're not talking about the American Revolution right now. I know. So, and I do see it even in our homeschool, is that we're doing a reading lesson and he's got a question about something else. And it's like,
at least it's you delivering it, you saying to him.
Right. So that was, I want them to continue to be motivated and curious, and to not have that curiosity punished, and when I say punished, I mean just decreased.
Redirected all the time, which eventually
and to not become stifled in their learning, I guess. And just be confident in who they are. You mentioned the quality of social interactions, to be confident enough to go out and make a new friend, and to be kind and aware, and to develop what it means to be an authentic friend. What does that mean? What does that look like? It doesn't mean that you have the same shoes or the same Stanley water bottle, or that you go to the same dance studio, whatever it might be. Just know it's a genuine, authentic friendship, because I think that was missing from my childhood quite a bit. So those are my hopes. I like what you said about the family unit. I don't think we're in so much of a situation where they wouldn't necessarily see me or my husband, but when you're at school for 8 hours, and then if you have activities or whatever, you're living for the weekend, and then weekends are full of other things. And what time do you really have? My other hope, and again, it goes back to another reason why I started homeschooling, is that we can travel and learn in different ways. And that was one of the big things that I had mentioned, I think, to my father-in-law when I was explaining why I wanted to homeschool. Not that he was necessarily against it, but just felt like I needed to defend a little bit, to just say, I want the control over what my kids are learning. And that includes learning experiences that are outside of the traditional classroom. So let's take a trip somewhere, and while we're there, we can access, like Gettysburg, or, for their birthday, we went up to Boston and we did part of the Freedom Trail. And we went and saw the site of the Boston Massacre, and we went to the Titanic Museum. I mean, it was very Owen heavy, but like they were learning in that moment. We were in the place where all of these things happened, and how incredible was that? And we were able to do it because we weren't in school, and I didn't feel guilty. I didn't have to feel guilty about pulling them out. And that was the other thing that also like bothered me a little bit, is this whole emphasis on attendance, which I understand. I do understand it. However, it bothers me because as their mother, as their parent, I want control over when I can take my kids out of school. And if I decide that we're taking a 2-week vacation to Alaska and it coincides with the start of school, guess what? They're not going to be there for the first week of school because we're in Alaska. And I think because there is such an issue with truancy and lack of attendance and all that, schools do have to be pretty strict about their attendance policy, and they reinforce being in school and being here. And I think shifting the narrative for our family to like what you had mentioned before, that learning can happen elsewhere. Learning actually doesn't only happen in the classroom. It happens everywhere, in the car, on the playground, at a museum, out in the community, at home. There's so many different ways that learning can occur. And I think, like I said, shifting that narrative a little bit. So
because if you think about it, then adults would never learn anything, because if learning only happens in school and you're out of school by the time you're 18, if you don't go to college, I mean, then what, you're just done.
You're just done learning.
You've done, you know what I mean? Like
That's it.
So I think, and I think a lot of homeschoolers would say that they want, one of the reasons they do take their kids out or start homeschooling to begin with is they want to give them the most success to live in this world, and that, you know, being in school, especially nowadays with all that entails, and they don't know if that's really setting them up to be the most successful, to, you know, to find their passion and to, you know, live their best life and
creating like well-rounded, I guess that's my whole, like, I want to create like a well-rounded, happy human.
And I think that there's a big emphasis on teachers to do that, but at the same time, that's really tough because it's not their child. And so then as a teacher overstepping by, you know, because sometimes, you know, you get parents critiquing, well, why are there social emotional lessons, or why is there this? And then there's parents that say, well, there's not enough of that. Why is there, you know, you can't ever please everybody. But, you know, I think that is the goal, to ultimately, you know, shape these well-rounded individuals. And expecting a teacher who's getting heat from all directions on every decision they make to be doing all this academic work while also trying to pull in this well-rounded, you know, social emotional developed person. It's a lot on that. And they're not the kid's parent. They also have them for 1 year. And so then they transition to a different teacher who's going to do things differently. You know, whereas, if you were doing that as the parent, to me, I see that as more of a parent's job. You know, and I can see why, if a parent is sending their kid to school, they want them to be getting a well-rounded, you know, yes, we want to talk about emotions and development and academics. We want all of that.
Art, but then music and
sports, all of that, you know, but, you know, then you're putting a lot on, especially if it's a classroom teacher who's often the one leading social emotional developments, because school counselors and things like that are beyond overworked and not always able to be pulled in for things like that. You know, it's just, then you get parents that think that they're overstepping. Why are you talking about this with my kid? Did you just teach them math and science? Like, okay, but if our goal is to try to pull in more of this, you know, like, then we have to have time for this. And then
I'm getting stressed out just listening you talk about it.
I know, I'm sorry.
Like, no, it's
thankless. It's thankless. It's a thankless. And I do remember that, especially, I would say my last year, I think it was a culmination of things going on in my own life and my child, but it was also some big shifts in the expectations on me and what, you know. And gosh, the inability to please anybody, because you make one you know, it was very exhausting. It was very exhausting. And just what you know, more clear definitions, what a teacher used to be responsible for teaching, which I'm not saying was the best, you know, I don't know. Was it better that an educator just be expected to teach the academic material and then, you know, let's do half days and they go home to their parent and do the other I don't know. Or should a teacher be doing all of those things? I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I just, because the homeschooling, obviously, for some parents, as much as they'd like to, is not something they can do for whatever reason at the moment. And, you know, so they're kind of at a loss where they want to do it this way, but they can. And so, I feel for them because I don't know what the schools have to operate a certain way. There is no getting around it. And
we're talking about a huge shift in education and theory and all of that for all of that to happen. I mean, that's a huge, like I said, a huge shift that is well outside the scope of our podcast. It's I think just, if we have some teachers that are listening, just know that we are so grateful for you and the work that you're doing. And we understand how lofty the expectations are of you. And it's why teacher burnout is just so high right now, and why there's such a need. You spoke earlier about how when we got into the field, it was like cutthroat trying to just get like any job. That's how I ended up as a long-term sub in an out-of-district school. Like, I couldn't get, you're on School Spring being like, what jobs are available? I'll apply for this one. And then, they only hire from the sub list. And then you're trying to get on the sub list and trying to also make ends meet. And so and now we've got people who don't even have any education background that are in getting hired as subs because the burnout is real and the expectations are incredible. So,
and parents have a right to not, if you don't like everything that's going on, I don't blame you. Try not to take it out on the teacher explicitly, because it's not always a teacher's, sometimes they have to run the room in a certain way. You can't have it a free for all for 26 kids in your classroom. You have to have some real things, procedures in place, but it's just, it's a system that to me seems to be breaking a bit. And I'm excited that there are so many families that are looking to, looking to homeschool or something different. And so that's why if you are, either a former teacher or current teacher thinking about homeschooling and leaving the field because you've got kids that you would like to, be doing this with yourself, or if you're a parent, that's interested, you by no means need to have any teaching background to teach your own kids, which we talk about in our next episode about myths. And hopefully that will give you some confidence if you are trying to take that step. But I think, for this first episode, our goal really was to introduce ourselves and give you some insight into our lives and our kids and sort of where we are in our own homeschooling journey, as well as sort of where we're coming from with our perspectives as former teachers, because it does give a little bit of a different view on all of this, I think, when you come from our background. So we are very excited to continue to share our journey with you all, as well as our knowledge based on being former teachers. So we are hoping that you stay tuned for future episodes that'll be coming soon and covering topics. We have a lot of topics and interviews planned, but things such as curriculum options and hidden resources, give you some tips.
We also alluded to our next episode, which is a big one, myths about homeschooling, because there are several, socialization being the number one. So we'll definitely tackle that.
Yes. We have a series on literacy and reading. So that's definitely a concern for a lot of homeschooling parents in the early years. If their kids don't know how to read yet, thinking, gosh, I can't possibly teach my own kid how to read. And you sure can. So we're going to be doing episodes specifically on reading and writing methods, math related episodes. Anything that covers the academic spectrum, we'll be getting into.
Yeah, probably multiple episodes.
Yes, multiple.
So we'll also take a look at how to homeschool if you have a learner that has special needs. What are your rights as a homeschooler with a child that has an IEP? How can you best service your child at home? And then also maybe look to outside providers or even the district as a resource.
Yes. And giving a little bit of insight into what you mentioned and what your rights are. So if you are a parent that has your kid in school and they're supposed to be receiving certain accommodations or, services, and they're not currently, you're being told one thing, what you are actually entitled to, because that doesn't always match, which is really too bad, but it doesn't. We also have, I mentioned, some interviews with former homeschoolers and homeschooled kids, which I think is going to be exciting to kind of get another perspective, more so than just us, but these are parents who have homeschooled their kids that now are in college or out in the workforce, and then also having some of those kids who were homeschooled that are now adults talking about their experience.
I'm excited for those.
And to hear what they think about their journey through the homeschooling process. We also are going to have an episode that's called Ask the Educator. So there'll be a spot in all of our episodes in the comment section where you can ask questions if you have things to ask us, either about personally about what we've shared with our own lives or specific educational questions. If you're a homeschooling parent, you don't have a teacher to reference, but you're really struggling with something and you want to, throw that in the comment section to ask us, we'll see if we can answer that question for you. So that'll always be an option.
Yeah. I ask her questions all the time. Is this normal for writing for a first grader? She's like, yeah, totally normal. And I'm like, okay, great. Okay, so even myself, I don't have all of the answers. So we thought it would be really nice to have people be able to ask questions about what is normal, what to expect, and come at it from a little bit of a different angle as far as being former teachers.
Right. Yeah. And when we go into our, I believe our third episode talking about picking curriculums, we're really going to give a lot of perspectives from the teacher view as far as how we looked at them and why we think that the ones that we're currently using are really great, but also things you might want to look for when you're choosing your own curriculum, because it can be an overwhelming process. But we have a little bit of, I think, extra insight into that, having worked with many curriculums over the years in our different placements at different schools. So, so until next time, we hope that you keep the lessons light and the moments meaningful. And thanks for escaping with us.